So good evening, everybody. I'm Chris Paxson, president of Brown University, and I want to welcome you to the Presidential Forum with Jessica Meir. Jessica is one of our outstanding honorary degree recipients this year, and we are thrilled to have her with us today to hear a bit about her incredible career, her time at Brown, her advice for our graduates, and we hope that forums like this one provide our graduates and families and the entire Brown community with a sense of the incredible accomplishments of our honorary degree recipients. So Jessica, as you may know, was selected for NASA's astronaut class in 2013. And she's been a part of space flights where she's contributed to hundreds of experiments in biology, earth science, human research, physical sciences, technology development. She spent 205 days in space. She's made 3,280 orbits of the Earth, traveling 86.9 million miles. And in 2019, NASA announced that Jessica is one of the 18 astronauts selected for Artemis, the new moon exploration program. So a little bit of background, Jessica, she graduated from Brown with a BA in biology in 1999. She earned an MS in space studies from International Space University in 2000 and a doctorate in marine biology from Scripps Institution of Oceanography in 2009. And prior to her time at NASA, she worked for Lockheed Martin's Human Research Facility. During this time, she also participated in research flights on NASA's reduced gravity aircraft and served as an astronaut in an underwater habitat for NASA Extreme Environment Mission operations. Just incredible. So Jessica, we're so thrilled to have you with us. You've had an incredible career already. I'm always amazed to hear about what you're going to do next. So just to begin, why don't you tell us a bit about what you're working on now, what your day-to-day life is like these days?
Well, thank you so much, President Paxson. It is wonderful to be here with you today and be connecting to the Brown family. So to start off with that first question, what am I doing right now? Well, it's been almost a year since I've been back from space. It's gone by really quickly, and I still think of getting back to space every day. But what we do is, after the first couple months when we have a lot of rehabilitation and then also debriefs and experimental sessions conducted for all of the valuable data when we first come back, really busy in that first 2 month period. Then for the next 4 months or so, we have the opportunity to take some much needed vacation and then also to travel and do outreach opportunities and talk to different groups and people. And really, I was looking forward to that more than anything, to share my mission with everybody else that made it possible along the way. Unfortunately, of course, that travel didn't happen given the fact that I returned in the middle of this global pandemic. But I have done a lot of virtual events like these and hope to do more in person, of course, in the near future soon. I came back into the astronaut office for my ground job in last October. And basically, we work different positions on the ground to support different programs at NASA. So right now, my role is called the Assistant to the Chief for SpaceX. So now I am working very closely with SpaceX and all of the crewed missions, the missions that we are sending on the Dragon vehicle to the International Space Station. And it's a very exciting time. We actually have one coming up in just about a week. Well, I will be traveling with the crew to Florida on Friday, and we'll be getting ready to launch this next crew up to the International Space Station. So that's what my day-to-day is right now, attending a lot of meetings to make sure that we're covering all of the issues, to make sure that we are well represented and all the bases are covered. Of course, this SpaceX Dragon is still a very new vehicle for us. So we want to make sure that all those checks are in place. And it's a very exciting time for us as astronauts as these new vehicles are coming online.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So you are busy and advancing great work. So let's go back to some of your recent time. You were part of the first all-female spacewalk in October of 2019. And I just have to ask you, what was that experience like? And as it was happening, as you were actually out there, were you thinking this is a monumental moment, or were you just focused on the work that you were doing?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and it's one that I'm asked quite frequently now and have given a lot of thought. But it really was a journey for me. And that was really because when I arrived on the space station, in those first days and even first weeks, you're really just learning how to do everything again. We describe it as being like a newborn because you have to figure out how to do everything without gravity. things that are in the background here on Earth become really complicated up there. How to go to the bathroom, how to feed yourself, how to drink water, all of these things you kind of have to relearn. So you are just really inundated. All of your senses and your body and your brain are just really bombarded by all of these new sensations in those first weeks, trying to figure out how to acclimatize to that environment. Then to top it off, when we are getting ready to do spacewalks, they are the riskiest thing that we do as astronauts, and they're also the most challenging, both mentally and physically. So now here I am having to get ready for this first spacewalk of my career in just really the first couple weeks since I've arrived on the space station. So it was really, really early on in the beginning of my mission. So I was 100% focused on the task at hand because I knew it was such an important job and one that we had to make sure that we conducted effectively in order to accomplish what we needed to for the battery upgrade for the space station. And then for this contingency spacewalk that we ended up doing first, there was a box that broke, another critical element basically of the power channel. We needed to repair and replace that so that we could have full power back on the space station. So a pretty big responsibility.
Yeah.
And then also, of course, knowing that we need to keep ourselves and our partner, so my colleague Christina Cook, safe while we're out there. So to answer the question, I really was trying not to focus on anything else other than those two objectives in that moment, because they really did deserve and demand all of my focus and concentration. I didn't want to get distracted by thinking about anything on a more philosophical level or the historical significance. So that was kind of an evolutionary process for me where that came about after the fact. After the spacewalk was completed, we completed the job successfully and we were back inside safely. Then I could kind of start thinking about the enormity, the gravity of what had happened. And to be honest, I was quite shocked because I didn't expect everybody to be paying such attention to it. You know, not
Yeah.
that many people tune in for spacewalks these days, and they're kind of boring to watch if you're not really intimately familiar with it. But for whatever reason, so many people around the world were tuned in that day. And that meant so much to us. And I think what it came down to for me was that it wasn't something that I looked at as a personal achievement by any means for myself, because I was just out there doing my job that day. And I am so fortunate to be in this place now that I had the opportunity to do that. So I really looked at it as a tribute and really paying homage to these generations of women and other minorities, that they were the ones when we didn't have a seat at the table that were truly breaking those glass ceilings and pushing those boundaries. So I hope that it is a celebratory moment. It is an achievement for them. And that's what I hope that they can see. And then for Christina and myself, that's really, it is our duty now to continue to inspire and promote that and to get the word out. And so I see that as kind of the trajectory of how it evolved for me. It was quite multifaceted.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you and maybe you can talk a little bit about this. After the spacewalk, you and Christina Koch wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about the experience, and you said, and I love this quote, "The real achievement is the collective acknowledgement that it is no longer okay to move forward without everyone moving together." And I was hoping maybe you could expand on that thought and talk about the importance of diversity and inclusion in NASA within the scientific community. And, maybe this is a lot of questions rolled into one, but any advice you can give to individuals from underrepresented groups, people who've been traditionally excluded from the kinds of careers that you have, considering a career in science?
Yeah, that piece was quite important to both Christina and myself. And I think it was also a bit of a reaction to a lot of things that we were hearing. There was so much speculation, and sometimes the media gets it wrong in terms of how things are presented with the original first female spacewalk that was supposed to happen earlier and not having the suits ready. And we wanted to make sure that people really understood the scenario and how this was really tied, I think, as we said it in that piece, is an anachronism to the past of the technology, because that really lagged behind where our intent is at NASA. But our intent behind that was just to remind everyone that it is true. If we are going to explore and go further, we need to do that with everybody represented. Otherwise, we're truly not meeting that goal. And that is something I am so encouraged by seeing now, as we see with this new presidential administration, in the options, in the candidates and the personnel that they are delegating to leading our country in various different positions. You see that diversity reflected. It's important to them. It's an objective that we know we need to fulfill. And as we plan for the Artemis mission as well, this administration actually changed the wording of our goal for the Artemis mission, and that is to put the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the moon. And so I think that we see that now. We're seeing it more and more all over as it is well overdue, but it is so refreshing to see that now. And I think that is part of what we're doing at NASA. And so I think it's important for us to remember, as I was saying with how I felt about that previous spacewalk, to acknowledge those that came before us and the work that still remains to go, and to realize, as I mentioned, Christina and I serving as a source of inspiration, to realize that maybe there are people that look like us or act like us or have something relevant in their background that are able to do these things. So maybe I can too. And just to realize that anything out there is within your grasp if you have that kind of recognition and that perseverance to follow through.
Thank you. So you mentioned already the fact that you returned from the mission in April 2020 in the midst of a pandemic. Now, some might say that being an astronaut means that you must be really good at quarantining. So maybe it wasn't a problem, but maybe you could say a little bit about what it was like adjusting to life in a pandemic after being at space. And maybe there's a silver lining. Maybe your careers taught you some lessons in maintaining connections with others when you can't physically be together. I don't know.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of valuable lessons, things that we integrate readily into our training as astronauts. And Drew Morgan and I, who were up there for the brunt of that, in the last 2.5 months of our mission, we were up there on the space station observing the unfolding of this incredible scale of this pandemic. And it was just surreal to be seeing it from that vantage point. But we did think about those connections. And actually, we produced some real-time videos on social media about ways to help adapt to this new era of isolation and confinement, and some strategies. And that involved things like sticking to a schedule, even though you might be tempted not to. Having that, I think, is a very important part for our psychology. Even things like just getting dressed normally and sitting down at a desk versus, just staying in your pajamas all day and working to kind of get you into that psychological mindset. Making sure that you incorporate exercise into your regular routine. As we know, that has vast benefits far beyond just physical ones, but also for our mental well-being, and how valuable, important communication strategies are with your loved ones living in such close proximity. We need to be good communicators and very, very good listeners. And all of these things are things that we actually train even at NASA. We have a buzzword for them here called expeditionary skills. And I like to think of it as how to play nicely with others, things that you teach your children growing up, or maybe the types of things, the types of people you would want to have with you on a camping trip. And so all those skills are really important. But it was quite a difficult transition for us to come back to this completely different planet. And it's something, of course, it's difficult to come back from a long duration space flight. It was about 7 months for me. It was 9 months for my crewmate, Drew Morgan. It's difficult anyway. And then for me to come back, I'm a hugger. I had all these plans to see my loved ones, to have that kind of physical contact of people again, and to visit, go to some good restaurants and see the people and friends and family that I hadn't seen for 7 months. I'd already been in isolation for 7 months. So that was quite difficult to come back to. But I think the isolation on the ground is actually much more difficult than the isolation that we experience as astronauts in space, because that's just a part of the mission. We expect that. There's a very good reason for it. When we look out the window and see the vacuum of space and where we are, we understand why we have that isolation. So because we're prepared for it and we are so heavily involved in what we're doing, I don't think I at least personally didn't feel that isolation or confinement in a negative way. But our society here on this planet is not built that way. We are not designed to just stay in our own little shells in our own homes and not interact with other people. And so that's why I think it's much more difficult to have this kind of isolation and confinement that we've all had for, over the past year now.
Yeah, and luckily it seems to be easing up, so that's really good. So another really interesting aspect, I think, I would imagine, of being on the International Space Station is that it brings together crews from all over the world and requires significant collaboration that isn't necessarily seen in every discipline. And so, are there lessons you've taken away from your experience in the very unique environment of the ISS?
Yes, absolutely. And that is one of the things that I cherish about our program on the International Space Station. That nature, that my mission consisted of not only NASA astronauts, but also Russian cosmonauts. And I had an Italian astronaut during my stay on the International Space Station. For me, because I flew up on the Soyuz spacecraft, the Russian spacecraft and rocket, I actually spent most of the year and a half prior to my flight in Russia living and working closely and training with them, learning how to fly a spacecraft in Russian. So that whole process involved with an entirely a different culture, a different language. That to me made things so much more rewarding and so interesting, especially at a time right now. If you look at the political climate, for me as an American to be there living and working in Russia, and the historical significance of as well. I was training in Star City, which used to be, it wasn't on the map during the Cold War. It was being kept secret from us during the space race. And there I was training in the very same classrooms where Yuri Gagarin was training before his first historic flight to space. So much of it there. And I think we know from the International Space Station, from so many examples, how much better we can do things, how we can be more successful if we have diversity, if we represent different peoples and different backgrounds, and also just being realistic about the way we have government resources these days. I don't think any country can do it alone. You know, when we eventually get to Mars, I think it will be an international endeavor. That's what it's going to take. And that is, I think, going to make it much more successful and much more interesting. I think you're going to have that kind of interest. And you know, this kind of goes back to the other question when we were talking about diversity in general. There are
Mm-hmm.
countless studies that have been done now here on the ground that show how much more successful teams are when they are diverse, not only in terms of the mission objectives or the particular program goals, but also for overall work satisfaction on an individual basis. People are simply happier in those kind of diverse teams. And that is the way to solve a problem. You know, you don't want to have 6 people on the space station that look and think and act exactly alike. You want to have different backgrounds represented, because if you have a problem, you want all these different ways of critical thinking represented.
Mm-hmm. So just coming back to the international aspects, how do you see the role of international diplomacy panning out as NASA prepares for Artemis 2024 and China entering the space exploration landscape? It's a really interesting time.
It is, absolutely. And as I just mentioned, I do think it is going to be critical to have those international agreements and partnerships as we go forward. We do have that with the Artemis program already. For example, the European Space Agency is building one of the critical elements for these missions. So we do have that level already. Now, China, of course, is one country that we do not cooperate with in terms of the space sector. And so it will be interesting to see what happens. Sometimes I actually get a little excited about that political climate, because if you think about the NASA history, that's when we accomplished great things. We would have never gone to the moon when we did if it weren't for the Cold War and the space race. Because we had that political objective behind it, we were able to allocate the appropriate resources. And you know, at least the way, you know, I think it's a bit unfortunate, but at least the way it seems to be in the current political landscape, unless you have that background, you simply can't get enough backing and funding behind it. So we'll see. You know, I like to think that if more countries are interested in these same kind of pursuits, then hopefully that will help stimulate all of us, and hopefully we can then in the end work together and accomplish these extraordinary goals.
So some initial competition that then leads to collaboration,
I
right?
think so. I think
Yeah.
that initial competition can be very healthy on all sides, and then I would hope that that would lead to the eventual collaboration as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. So just changing the topic a little bit, in an interview you did last year with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, you said you were on the space station, you were looking through the hatch, and you saw others on board, and you thought that, and I may not have the quote right, but you felt like the experience felt like home, like the ISS was home. And as someone who's lived and worked in many extreme environments, how has your concept of home changed? And you know, many of our graduates may find themselves moving for work, going to new places. What advice might you have for them about finding that feeling of home and community in your work, no matter where you are?
Yeah, that is something that I very much felt. It was really interesting for me. As soon as I came through the hatch and entered the International Space Station, I really did feel like I was right where I belonged. And of course, it was a place that I had never been before, and it was not even on this planet, but I really did feel like I was home. And I think that that's true in so many things that we do when they're associated with our passion. When there's something that we know drives us, fuels that fire within us, and that we're just purely excited about. I think for me, at least, that's when I felt at home, whether it's been doing research in the Antarctic or being up on the International Space Station. For me, it's been when I have this kind of mutual physical and mental challenge, and I'm just doing something that I believe in very deeply and I get really excited about. And so I think it's a good thing, for the graduates of 2021 to be thinking about, for so many people to think about as they're transitioning careers, to remember not to be afraid to take that risk. Even if you are stepping slightly outside of your comfort zone, you might find a new home in which you're even more comfortable and somewhere that you belong even more so if you truly are following your heart and following those passions.
That's very good advice. Thank you. So you've spent a lot of time in extreme environments studying how animals cope in these settings, which I just think is fascinating. So you've studied emperor penguins, elephant seals in Antarctic water. You've even raised a dozen bar-headed geese, which I didn't know were the highest flying birds in the world. And what draws you to the study of animals? And are there any overarching lessons you take away from this line of research?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can go all the way back to my childhood and trying to look at and examine what kind of excited me. And that was this curiosity, this scientific curiosity, wanting to understand more about the world around me, particularly about nature. And I think that's why I ended up pursuing biology when I was at Brown University. And for me, that evolved into looking around the planet and seeing these extraordinary behaviors that were exhibited, like these transglobal migrations of birds, or these deep divers that I studied, or the high altitude animals that you mentioned, these animals that truly push the extreme and exhibit these extraordinary behaviors. I just wanted to understand how they could do it. We are so limited as humans compared to these other animals. And what is it that it is unique? How have they evolved? What are their adaptations that allow them to thrive in those very challenging environments, like deep under the surface of the ocean or high altitude? These extremophiles almost, looking at it from the context of exploration, all of those things have been a central element, I think, in everything that I've done. But that kind of curiosity, I think, is what drives everybody. It doesn't have to be about science, of course. It can be about anything, and just understanding how things work, how we work, how, all of the different disciplines, all, including the arts as well. I think it's so much more fruitful when we involve the arts in terms of how we're interpreting everything in science as well. This evolution to STEAM instead of just STEM, I think it helps us communicate the things that we're doing and the importance of it and reach so many more people.
Yeah. It's interesting because during the pandemic, we've been thinking and talking a lot about adaptability and how much can humans adapt and under what circumstances. Did your study of animals teach you anything about adaptability?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, it's that common thread of I was looking at the physiology of animals in extreme environments. And sometimes I sort of jokingly talk about how I think it's come full circle for me, where I used to be here at NASA working as a scientist to help organize and facilitate the experiments that are done on previously on the space shuttle and now on the space station. Then I moved on to doing my own science and doing physiological experiments using these animals as my subjects to understand more. And now I'm kind of paying my dues as being the subject in space being poked and prodded in the name of science. So it's kind of come, how I like to say, it's come full circle for me now. But I think it is a really important lesson for us to take when we look around the animal kingdom and see how these animals and how our actions as humans are making these animals have to acclimate and adapt in new ways because we are the ones responsible for changing their environment. So I think there's really a lot to learn in both directions there.
Yeah, and you touched on something really important, and I know that you're an ardent environmentalist, and I don't know how your experience of these extreme climates and your research has affected your own perspectives about climate change.
Yes, absolutely. That's something that I think is an integral component for everybody coming back from space. Now, for me, as you mentioned, I've always cared a lot about the environment. It's always been an important part of my life. But some people, don't really have that background going up there. And I've heard from so many individuals how they come back to Earth feeling such a deeper appreciation for all of that in general. When you look back at your planet from above, it is just, I think, impossible to not see that. You see this thin, tenuous band of an atmosphere, and you can see this gradient of different blues as the air gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and then finally disappears into the blackness and void of space. You see how tiny that is, and that is all that sustains life on our planet. The beautiful colors, the interconnected oceans, and the land masses. It is just impossible to not appreciate how fragile and beautiful and unique our planet is, and that we really only have one, and that we all need to work together to protect it. That's the other thing that I felt quite powerfully from space, was that feeling of interconnectedness.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking down at the Earth, you don't see any of these man-made geographical boundaries that we've imposed upon ourselves. You see these united land masses, and you know that it is our planet, everybody, every human, and that we are all in this together. And I think that's important, very important to remember, whether it's from an environmental standpoint, in terms of everything that was going on in our country and with civil unrest in recent times, and also in terms of the global pandemic. We are all in this together, and it's important to take that step back and remember that perspective.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. So let's come back to Brown. And it's been a number of years since you were a student, not too many, but some. And as I'm sure you remember, the open curriculum is a hallmark of the Brown education. It allows students the freedom to explore. When you look back, how did the freedom of the open curriculum play a role in how you shaped your career? And if you say it didn't, it was completely irrelevant, I'll keel over. So, how was it important to you?
Well, don't worry. I certainly don't think it's irrelevant. And I always to say this to people that are interested in Brown and trying to explore things a little bit further. And I think it is so unique, and it is such a wonderful part of the way that we do things at Brown. And that's because it gives people this flexibility to explore beyond, what they're worried about. So, if you take a lot of students, we have a lot of very, very type A high achievers that go to Brown, and they don't want to get a bad grade because they're worried about how that might reflect on their GPA and on their transcript for whatever they might want to do later. So I think at a lot of places, you would really be a little bit afraid to think outside the box and take something that is outside of your comfort zone to make you a more diverse, well-rounded person, because you might be worried that you might not do that well at it. So I love that freedom that Brown offers with the open curriculum, with the ability to take things pass, fail, basically satisfactory or non-satisfactory, to give people that freedom to explore, because I think that very nature of being more well-rounded is so important to every other field in the long run. It doesn't matter, as astronauts especially, we don't want scientists that have just been in the little scientist box the entire time. You have to be very well-rounded, very operational to do well in this world at NASA. And that's, I feel like, something that I learned, even way back at Brown. So I explored as well. I took some classes like religious studies, which were far outside of my comfort zone, as a very traditional biology and scientist background. I took I have many other examples of classes that I took that I think I would maybe have not been compelled to if I were somewhere else. So I think that freedom to explore, again, it's always about exploration to me,
Yeah,
but that freedom to explore that the open curriculum offers is so powerful.
that's great. So the other thing people talk a lot about at Brown is the connections they make with faculty, with mentors, developing role models. And, are there mentors or role models that you met at Brown or elsewhere who've really guided you throughout your career? And do you have one person or a team of people, or how do you think about mentorship?
Yeah, there absolutely are people at Brown that made a difference in my trajectory for sure. And that's something that I actually talk a lot about when I give talks to various audiences about the importance of mentorship. and how valuable, what an impact it makes, and how it's important for us now to reach out and to become those strong mentors for people. I was extremely fortunate to have some remarkable mentors, people that were not only top scientists in their field, but they were also just top individuals. They cared about me as a person, and that, I think, really made all the difference. You know, for me, thinking back to my time at Brown, I remember my very first introductory biology course. I was pretty sure when I came to Brown that I wanted to major in biology. So I took, the Bio 100 with Ken Miller, and I thought, this will really tell me if I'm doing the right thing. And I was blown away. He did such an incredible job teaching that class. And we all know that Ken Miller doesn't need to be teaching Bio 100, but he does it because he knows how important it is to capture that interest early on to start that trajectory. And I actually ran into him at a conference several years ago now when I was still working as a scientist. And I told him that story and how important it was. And it was so nice to make that connection. I had my Swedish teacher. So my mother is from Sweden, but she didn't actually teach me Swedish growing up. So I took Swedish at Brown from Anne Weinstein. And that was so many wonderful memories there, sitting in the Weinstein's living room and having those language classes, going on to animal behavior seminars later with Jonathan Waggy, and sitting in different parks around Providence, making these observations of animals. And then on to my honors thesis, which was most relevant to what I do now with Herman Vandenberg. And that was actually even space-related research that I was doing for my honors thesis. So many valuable connections that I had there throughout my professors and my mentors that absolutely made a difference to me as I was developing the very foundation to become a scientist.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And, I have to say, Brown, I am constantly blown away by the effort and the caring and just the dedication of Brown faculty to our students, and to our undergraduates. That teaching the intro course is a story that you would still hear today if you were here. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. I think I'd be remiss if I don't mention Jim Head as well. And that was something for me, which is such a great connection story. He, of course, is such a renowned planetary geologist, going all the way back to the Apollo program. As a biologist, I didn't take any geology courses, but I did want to, as a space geek, I really wanted to. So I took Jim's affectionately known as Rocks for Jocks course, and I had such a good time, geeking out in all the little extra study sessions. And I even met John Glenn because of that class with Jim Head. John was actually one of the commencement speakers the year that I graduated. So a little bit of fate played in there as well.
Oh, that's really great. So think back and try to remember. I'm sure you can still remember the excitement and the promise, perhaps a little bit of fear, trepidation of the unknown that you felt when you walked out through the Van Wickle gates at commencement. And at that time, maybe not the moment you walked through the gates, but around that time, what were you thinking about, and what surprised you the most when you got out of school?
Yeah, there's a lot. I remember that moment, and I
You
remember,
really?
well, being with my friends and just kind of everything surrounding that. And I think
Yeah.
it's such a powerful moment. And I think that I felt a little bit like I did when I defended my PhD thesis, when I stood up there in front of those people and I thought, wow, I do deserve this. I have done so much work. Like, it is time for this. And I think I felt a little bit about that as well. You feel such a sense of accomplishment and such a close connection with all of the people around you. There's just such a whirlwind of emotions. Your families are there, your close friends are there, and the whole university experience when you're really away from home for the first time. There was so much going into it. And then having achieved that and graduating and thinking, okay, well, what's next? And for me, it was kind of a confusing time because I had thought a lot about what I wanted to do. And I knew that eventually I wanted to go back to school, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet. I didn't have that exact clear path that some people have. And so I was kind of struggling. Maybe I'm interested in medical school, or maybe I want to do a PhD, but I didn't know for sure. And so that's, another great fortuitous Brown connection that I had in the lab with me working for my senior honors project was a guy called Peter Lee. And he was an MD PhD student at Brown. And he was also a big space geek like me. And he told me about the International Space University, which I'd never even heard of. It was only a few years old. And so it seemed like a natural step for me to apply. And I ended up going shortly after graduation to that master's program in France because it was the perfect solution. I knew I wanted to to do more, but I didn't know what yet. This was a year program. It was all about space. I knew that that would benefit me. And so that connection with Peter really made all of that happen after I walked through those Van Wickle grates. And another great connection, Peter actually is now the principal investigator for one of the experiments that I conducted on the International Space Station during my mission. So during the mission, I was up there working on these little heart cells, and that was actually, Peter was one of the co-investigators on that experiment. So another big full circle story where I worked with Peter on my very first scientific experiment ever, and then I worked on his experiment in space.
That's amazing. That's a really incredible story. So we've talked a lot about how important it is to take chances and not be afraid of failure. That's the beauty of the open curriculum. And you've been quite open. You didn't become an astronaut on your first try. And and I think for a lot of our students, they're going to go out in the world and things are not always going to go exactly as they'd planned. How do you stay motivated through setbacks? What advice can you give people in advance of maybe facing some setbacks from time to time?
Yeah, it's difficult because in the moment, sometimes it's hard to see that. And one of the things that I like to point out, the moment that I arrived in space, I knew that it was all worth it. Of course, there were frustrating moments for me. There were setbacks. As you mentioned, when I applied and interviewed the first time, I made it all the way to the final round, but I didn't get selected. And I had to put that behind me. It would have been very easy to say, well, I have this other career now that makes me really happy and fulfilled. I don't need to be an astronaut. It wasn't meant to be. I don't want to go through all of that psychological toll of the interview process again. But I knew that I was kidding myself, that I would always question it if I didn't put myself out there and take that risk again, even if, it was going to involve some pain along the way. And I think that's just the thing to keep in the back of your mind, that if you are pursuing something that you're totally, truly passionate about, it will be worth it and it will pay off in the end. And you can expect that you will have those setbacks along the way. I do truly believe that if you don't experience some failure, you're missing out on something, because we learn the most valuable lessons by those failures. And so I think, sometimes you got to wait. It's always hindsight, right? It's always 2020, but I can tell you that it is always worth it in the end.
Yeah, that's very good advice. So I'm going to ask you one final question, and this is another advice question, big picture. As the great class of 2021 is preparing to leave Brown, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I think it rolls into some of these things that we've just talked about today, and also especially given the climate that they've been experiencing for the past year. I know it has been incredibly difficult and frustrating for everybody in facing the challenge that we've had with this global pandemic. I can't even imagine what that would be like to be a graduating senior and to be missing out on all these incredibly special things. It is so difficult. But just remember to take that step back and that perspective that we talked about earlier, to think about what's important in the long run and in the bigger picture, not maybe just in that moment right in front of you. And I think that's something that's so easy, even for me, to get caught up in that moment, to worry about those little things that are just present in front of you right then. And sometimes we get far too caught up in those trivial matters, and it's really just a waste of our time and our energy. So remembering to take that step back, to have that more global perspective, to realize how connected we are as humans with all of those people around us, and really with all of the other humans that we share this planet with. And I think with that kind of perspective, with the foundation that they've received at Brown, and with the passion for which they will go out into the world, they can truly achieve anything.
Jessica, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And again, congratulations on your honorary degree. And thank you so much for coming back to campus to do this talk. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful being here today. And the last thing I wanted to point out was this brown flag that's hanging behind me. That flag was actually up with me on the International Space Station, flew proudly in the cupola and other areas. So this flag will be making its way back to you as well as a few other items that I have. But I really just wanted to share this with all of the graduates and with all of the community that this was up there with me during my mission. So
that's really, really nice. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much.